Alright guys, here is the next installment of my best troop in the game series. If you somehow stumbled onto this video without seeing the first one, here's the link. Now let's just jump right into it. Now I have factored in the different health features that each troop has. For instance, the golem at the top of the charts, that number is the number of hit points he has, including the health of the two mini golems once he dies and splits into two pieces. Both the heroes have their ability heal points added on to their total hit points. This is because most of the time players wait until their hero takes enough damage so the heal isn't wasted. Now the witches were tricky again, so I ended up going with 16 skeletons total because a level 2 witch can have 8 skeletons on the field at a time. It won't take too long for those skeletons to die and for the witch to summon 8 more. Now that number is a little low for skilled players, but you can imagine raising the witch's line if you better protect her. Now I was slightly surprised when I saw that the golem was above the lava hound. The lava hound has the most hit points of any single troop in the game, but when you factor in the golemite and the lava pups, the numbers change and the golem has the upper hand. This is because the collective lava pups do 420 damage per second and the two golemites do only 22 damage per second. So in the end, the benefit tends to even out. Next is the Barb King, and you'd expect a level 40 Barb King to have more hit points than that. I mean, it takes so long to get him to level 40, right? Well, he does have a very large amount of damage when the golem and lava hound do almost none, so the king would be far too powerful if he was on the same level as the golem and the lava hound. Next, we have the level 5 P.E.K.K.A. coming in strong. Considering how much damage they do, I mean, the level 5 P.E.K.K.A. all around are a very powerful troop. Next, we have the dragon with a large amount of hit points, which it needs considering how much damage air defenses do. I know there are only 4 air defenses, but they deal out quite a large amount of damage. After that, we have the archer queen, which again you'd expect a level 40 archer queen to be much higher on this chart, but you have to remember that she shoots from so far behind the other troops. If you use her right, she won't be getting hit very often. Now this does factor in her heal ability, but it doesn't factor in her archers or her cloak time of 5 seconds. So really you can imagine extending her health points even higher when you factor in that she won't take damage for a full 5 seconds. Next is the witch, and her line might seem a little low, but if you use her correctly and keep her away from danger, that line can surpass the dragons. Next is the Valkyrie, followed closely by the healer. Now I want to point out that the Valkyrie is one of the higher hit point troops, and considering the fact that she only takes up 8 housing spaces versus the 20, 25, and 30 housing spaces of the previous troops, suggests that she is pretty darn tough. Now the healer has that many hit points because of the fact that, like I said earlier, air defenses do a crap ton of damage, so the healer has to be able to withstand them for at least a short amount of time. Next is the giants, just about where you'd expect them with a good amount of hit points, but not too many because they only take up 5 housing spaces. After that, we have the balloons, followed closely by the hog rider. Now the balloons don't have a ton of health, but they have significantly more health than the minions, and the balloons go after defenses only, allowing them to get to the air defenses immensely faster. Now just about everyone knows that you drop the balloons first, then the minions to let them clean up, but it is nice to know the why behind what you're doing, so I hope this helped illustrate that fact. Now hog riders have a solid amount of health, and if you remember from my last video, they also deal out a significant amount of damage for totally ignoring walls, making them a pretty decent troop. Next up, we have the wizards, not having all that many hit points as you'd expect because wizards really have to be protected, which is why the wizard golem combo is so effective. Now wizards do a massive amount of damage for their housing space, so don't let their low hit points discourage you from using them. Then we have the barbarians, not too far behind the wizards, showing just how tough level 7 barbarians are. Now I think it's kind of cool that the barbarians start under the minions and eventually intercept and surpass their hit points. Now the only real significance of that is you're a little better off upgrading your barbarians instead or before of your minions. Again, it really comes down to which one you use more, but the benefit of upgrading different troops at different times in the game will be a topic of my next video in this series. After that, we have the goblins having much less hit points than I actually thought they did. If you saw my last video, you know that the goblins actually had the most damage per second for the amount of housing space they had. So one of the reasons the goblins' health is so low is most likely because their damage per second against resources is pretty dang high. After that, we have the wall breakers, and lastly, the archers. You would expect either the wall breakers or the archers to be in last place because they should be in last place. If the wall breakers had more health, it'd be too easy to get into the center of bases, and the archers shouldn't have many hit points because they shoot over walls and shoot from behind other troops just like the archer queen does. Now, like I did in the last video, I'd like to look at the hit points per housing space just for fun. It's not the best way to look at troops, but it is definitely interesting. So if we take the golem's hit points and divide by 30 to get the amount of hit points per housing space and do the calculation to every troop on this graph, then this is what we find. Now this graph might be familiar because it looks pretty similar to the graph we just talked about. Really, the biggest difference is the fact that the troops are closer together and no one is lying on the bottom of the graph all scrunched up. The main reason for this is if a troop has more housing space, it should have more hit points. Simple and effective. So instead of walking you all the way through this very similar graph, let me just highlight a few of the main points. First, we can see that the Giant has a slightly higher ratio than the P.E.K.K.A. with the Valkyrie and Witch close by. Towards the bottom, the minions just barely beat out the wizards, and the wall breakers take the new last place spot. So I hope you guys learned something today and enjoyed the video, and in the next week or two, I will be posting the third installment in this series, talking about upgrading different troops and the cost benefit of doing so. Lastly, I just want to say thank you guys so much for supporting this new series. Make sure to drop a like and a comment if you enjoyed this video. All the positive feedback I've gotten on the first video is what kept me going and wanted me to make more awesome videos for you guys. I'll see you guys for the next installment in this series, and until then, clash on.